Hello and welcome to the channel. So let's set the scene. The year is 1953. Hang on. So the year is 1953 and a Glycine sales director was on a flight from Bangkok to Calcutta and he got into conversation with the pilots, and what they really wanted was a watch that would be dual time. So whilst they were flying across time zones, they could track the time in both places. Now this seems something we take for granted today, but don't forget this is a year before the ROLEX GMT Master would make it to market. When the flight touched down, the sales director at Glycine sent a message straight back to HQ, telling them that they must develop a watch for pilots. It must be able to offer dual time functionality, a 24-hour dial, 24-hour bezel, calendar, and some water resistance. So Glycine set about work, and just a few short months later, the Glycine Airman was born. Since 1953, this watch has been a favourite amongst military pilots, commercial pilots, and of course watch collectors like us. So this is my second Glycine Airman, and it's quite different to the first one that I purchased. Anyway, let's get stuck into the review. So starting with some specs on this one, it's 12.3mm thick, so this is a thin watch. That measurement includes the top hat sapphire. It's got a 22mm lug width. I measure 40.2mm in diameter. It's 30 meters of water resistance. It's got a 50mm lug to lug, so pay attention to that if you have a smaller wrist. And this one is powered by the Sleater SW330-1 GMT movement. So I want to spend a little bit of time today just talking through how this works, because when you look at the watch, there's a lot going on with the dial. So the innermost marking on the dial is a 60-second counter. The next row of markers are the hour markers, and these are laid out as a mixture of rectangles, triangles, and circles. I'll explain the relevance of that in a second. The final row of markers on the dial is a 1 to 24 numeric. Then of course you've got this brushed outer bezel, again with 24-hour markers on it. And not forgetting, at 3 o'clock there is of course a date window. Now with this particular model of the Airman, the hour and minute hand work as a traditional watch. So you have one rotation every 12 hours, which means you need to completely ignore the 24-hour markings on this and just use the rectangles and triangles to essentially read your time, which takes some getting used to, I can definitely tell you that. And then to tell the time with the GMT hand, obviously your minutes is going to be the same, but that GMT hand utilizes the outer numeric 24-hour scale. And then the outer bezel can be rotated left or right to track a third time zone with the GMT hand. And that outer 24-hour bezel is operated with this screwing lock just below the crown, and you'll see you just simply unwind it to unlock, turn it left or right, there's a nice little bit of friction there, and then lock it back into place by screwing the lock back in. It looks like a second crown, but its only function is to lock and unlock that bezel. Perhaps the point of biggest confusion when you're shopping for a Glycine Airman is that there's two distinctly different models, plus a lot of special editions that sort of combine features from both. But the two most popular models, as I see it, are the Purist and the Chief. Now the Purist is more faithful to the original Glycine Airman. The original was a freehander with the dual time solely being from that outer rotating bezel, and that's what the Purist gives you. Whereas this model, the Chief, obviously gives you the extra functionality of the 3 time zones in the GMT hand, but it becomes more difficult to read the watch, and also that 12-hour rotation is not in keeping with the original. The original model rotated the first time zone on a 24-hour scale, so one rotation every 24 hours, and when you buy the Purist model, that's what you're getting. So there's fundamental differences between the Purist and the Chief. Ultimately, I think it's down to you. Would you like something closer to the original, a little bit easier to read, or would you like something perhaps a bit more modernized, with increased functionality, but can be harder to distinguish the different times at a glance. Having had both watches, I find it difficult to pick. I can see a place for both of them, so I'm happy that Glycine give you the choice. In terms of water resistance, these watches are all over the place. The older models were 200 meters water resistance. Then for some reason they went to 10 meters of water resistance, because apparently that was faithful to the original, which to me sounds like a rubbish excuse. And now they seem to be manufactured at 30 meters water resistance. But especially with this one, the Chief is called the Chief because historically it was designed for the Navy and the Chief Petty Officer. So it makes the 30 meters water resistance on this particular model seem even more questionable. There's not too much more to say on the dial with this. Just take a note that the hour and minute hands and the dial, the loom is faux Tina, so that might be an issue for some of you. But one thing that I love about this dial is it looks historic. I think they really captured that vintage feel nicely. If you add in that lovely piece of top hat sapphire crystal and the gentle little distortion you'll get around the edges, it's a pleasing vintage warmth, something that I seem to like in quite a lot of watches. I've pointed that out on several before, and this watch is no exception. Case finishing is superb on this watch. I think it absolutely punches with the brushing and the polishing. Even when you hold it under loop and you look up close, it looks fantastic. This model came on a mesh bracelet, which is super comfortable. No rough edges, no sharp edges. Again, no complaints at all. It's easy to adjust. You can just slide the keeper forwards or backwards and fit it quickly to your wrist. Case back, there's nothing to remark on with this one. It's a simple, solid case back with a circular brushed finish and some specs. It's worth pointing out again, depending on what edition you buy of this watch, you may get an open case back. The Purist that I had last time around had an open case back with a decorated rotor, but I prefer the closed case back. And the reason is that the open case back had a rotor with what looked like a sort of cartoon image of a propeller aircraft on it, and I felt it actually cheapened the watch. On the wrist, I've got a 17.5 centimeter wrist, and I think this watch wears really nicely, but that lug to lug is the Achilles heel. For a 40mm watch to have a 50mm lug to lug, it's quite a strange proportion. If the watch fits on your wrist in terms of lug to lug and the width, then you're going to have a super comfortable fit because it's slim, it's relatively lightweight, and it wears really nicely. But if you have a smaller wrist, I think you're going to struggle with that 50mm lug to lug. So if you're buying this one blind, it may be worth getting the measuring tape out and just having a look how that's going to sit. Anyway, let me tell you what I don't like about this watch. So first thing is, I don't like the 12-hour rotation with this. It was historically accurate that the watch would rotate on a 24-hour basis with the hour and the minute hand. And although I can see this is obviously a cheaper way to do a freehand because you're taking a stock SW330 off the shelf and applying the hands, because the hour markers on the dial are not easy to read at a first glance, that 12-hour makes it far more challenging to get a quick read of your home time than if both of the hands rotated on a 24-hour rotation. The next point is the minute hand and the GMT hand are remarkably similar, and at a quick glance it can be easy to mistake them for one another and therefore get an incorrect reading on the time. It's worth noting that not all Airman models share this fate. Some of the special editions, like the Base 22 GMT for example, do have distinctive differences between the minute hand and the GMT hand. The loom you haven't seen up until now because it's not great. In fact, on the dial it's atrocious, on the hands it's okay. I've got other watches with printed dials that have good loom on the dial. The Momentum Sea Quartz and my Mido Ocean Star Tribute are both examples of how this can be done right. The locking feature on the bezel, it has a tiny amount of play even when it's fully locked and screwed down all the way. I don't think there's any excuse for that. Finally, the water resistance, I touched on this. Why have we got 30 meters now when this watch has previously been engineered for 200 meters? It smacks of cost cutting, and it's something that's more likely to turn watch enthusiasts off. That being said, there's a lot of things I like about this watch. First up, this is a genuine slice of aviation timekeeping history, and that's something that, as a history buff, really appeals to me. Next up, I would say this is great value. It's difficult to put an exact price on it because they seem to be on sale in different places at different times throughout the year. I've noticed particularly on Joma Shop or Ashford.com, where I picked up this one, there's normally always some offers on or some sales, and you can typically pick these up for sort of $500 to $700 US, which I think is a great price for what you're getting, not just in terms of specs, but also, like I said, in terms of that historical significance. The slim case offers a lot of versatility with this one. If you're somebody who might wear it with a shirt, then this is going to work really well for you because it's so slim, it's so slender, it will slide straight under a cuff. But equally, if you want to put it with a t-shirt, it's going to look great as well. The finishing on this watch is excellent. It looks perfect even under loop. The polishing is really nicely done. There's no ripples, it's clean. The brushing is silky smooth. It's very defined between the brushing and the polishing. I think this feels like a Swiss-made watch. And I think the final point to mention with this is that despite the fact that Glycine is now part of the Invicta group, I don't see any signs of that with this particular watch. I think the weak points with this watch, like for example the loom, were already there before Invicta came in and purchased Glycine. So despite what you might read online, from my perspective, I haven't seen any Invicta in this watch, apart from with the service centre. But I'll tell you more about that in a second.
Yes or no, this is your last chance, no beating around the bush.
So to conclude with the Glycine Airman, I think, as you probably gathered, one of the most important things is to know that there is different models with key differences in the way that they operate, and it's just important to have your eyes open and know exactly what you're buying and try and figure out what's going to work best for you. For me, I like the Chief a lot, I'm really happy with it, but I understand that the Purist is going to be a better option for a lot of people. Let me know in the comments what you think about the Glycine Airman, and if you're more tempted by the freehander or you prefer the functionality with the forehander. And I did mention earlier on that I had an issue with the Glycine service centre. Well, in fact, it's the Invicta service centre. My first Glycine Airman had a date change issue. It was under warranty, so it was sent across to Switzerland and it was picked up by Invicta in their service centre. It ended up taking months and months and lots of chasing on email from me. I wasn't best pleased, and when I got the watch back, there was what looked like a pubic hair right there, slap bang on the dial, which is unbelievable considering that must have been touched by a watchmaker and then gone through some sort of quality check before being shipped to me. It felt like a slap in the face, and it's the reason why I fell out of love with my first Glycine Airman and sold it. But time has been a healer and I've forgiven it, and that's why I've come back. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you got something useful out of it. If you did enjoy the video, please don't hesitate to give a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button and that bell icon as well, or you probably won't get notified by YouTube about any of my uploads. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one. Cheers.